Hey guys, today we're going to be talking a little bit about Lucio. Specifically, I'm continuing on the 4 Mistakes series where I look at 4 common mistakes I generally see newer players to this hero make that maybe more experienced players do not make. And so I'm trying to go through most of the heroes, and I've hit a lot of these heroes before. My goal is to kind of teach you a hero in a different way than you would normally hear. We usually see everything of what you should be doing on a hero, but oftentimes we don't notice the mistakes that we're making unless someone points them out, and so we're going to be looking at the mistakes. On Lucio, there are I would say three major mistakes and one minor mistake. The first is Lucio's generally just don't peel enough. Against targets that are melee that can do quite a bit, Lucio has a pretty easy peel with a low cooldown, it's fast to activate, and you can quickly save your team. Lucio is one of the best peels against frontline because you can quickly knock away a bunch of frontliners and your team can still DPS them while they're just knocked slightly back. There are a lot of talents for your sound wave, and so you can utilize these talents to kind of enhance the peel or potentially give you another effect while you're doing it. A great example of this would be like at level 4, Subwoofer can knock 75% further. So you can really launch people away. Well, that gets them out of your team's range, but it definitely gets them away from them. There's also things like off the wall, where as long as you're wall riding within a certain amount, you can go up, knock someone away, and then come back onto a wall again. So there are a lot of different talents you can take, but I would say peeling is probably the most underrated thing that I see. And I actually use Lucio a lot in my lower ranks for my bronze to masters in healing. Or at least in the healing role, and a lot of people said, "Well, how do you do it? He doesn't really kill a lot of people. He doesn't really wave clear, camp clear. Aren't those the rules that you usually recommended?" And yes, that's true, but part of the reason why I had so much success with Lucio in low ranks is because people are not good at focusing one target at a time. And so when they're spreading out their damage across the team, it's really easy to heal an entire team at once. And then the only thing that I was really concerned about is if someone started focusing someone that's getting a little bit lower, I would quickly knock back that person and give my team more time to heal back up. And so the number one mistake that I found watching low rank Lucios, but not just low rank Lucios, even some master players that were picking up Lucio for a little bit, is that they weren't peeling enough. The next mistake that I see, and this generally happens more in the Master Grandmaster area because they generally have the more confidence to do this, is going Assassin a little too early. What I mean by that is it's not uncommon for Lucio players to go in the backline and start hitting one of the backliners, potentially hit them with a Q, a couple auto attacks, and you can run down just about anyone. In Heroes of the Storm, almost every hero in the game runs at the same movement speed. There are some exceptions with people who run slightly faster due to a talent or slightly faster when they've used a specific ability, but for the most part, I would say about 95% of the time, every hero in the game moves at a similar movement speed. Lucio allows you to move just a tad bit faster, sitting at 111% movement speed by just having your crossfade on the speed boost. So it should be 110%, but I mean, sitting at 111%. Anyway, so you move just a little bit faster than people, so you have one major advantage. Not only can you attack while moving, but you're also moving faster than the person that you're running after. So if you find a target that's low health, Lucio is one of the few heroes in the game that can run down just about any hero in the game and take them out. The problem is, and I see this happen quite a bit with master players, specifically assassin master players that pick up Lucio, they go too early and they're attacking a target that they can't kill and their healer will keep them up, and they're not healing their team, which is the main reason you're drafted, is to heal your team. You are drafting a healer. If you want to play like that, you might as well just play Tracer or Genji, but trying to pick Lucio to do this is a huge mistake. Now, there are times that you can do this. If you've dominated in a team fight, you've taken out their healer, you've taken out a couple of their members, and your team is just running it down and just trying to finish off any other people, those are the times when it's perfectly fine to shift into that assassin mode and go finish off a target or two. But until then, it's a huge mistake that I see way too often, especially in high rank. The third mistake is being in the wrong song at the wrong time. Now, my rule of thumb is that if you are going to use Amp It Up and your team is below 80% health, and you're not going to ult in combination with it, I generally recommend being in heal. There are some exceptions where your team's dominating, their team's really weak, and the health differences won't matter. You can go speed boost to catch up and take out whoever you want to. But in an even fight, the healing is generally going to be more valuable than the speed boost. There are just a few exceptions. One, if you're running away from the enemies, if the enemies are running away from you, in both of those exceptions, you should be looking for more of the speed boost. Now, if you're running away from the enemies and your team is getting CC'd, the speed boost is meaningless. So you should switch to healing. So, put simply, you should be in green if either team is running away from the other team and no one on your team is CC'd. You should be in yellow almost every other time. And this is in team fights, of course. As you're rotating from lane to lane, feel free to stay in green. Whenever you're doing camps, feel free to stay in yellow. Like, the rest of it is pretty straightforward. But as far as during team fights, if either team is running away, it's generally easier to be in yellow. And if both teams are just actively fighting, it's generally better to be in better to be in yellow if teams are actively fighting. Better to be in green if either team's trying to run away. Hopefully that helps you guys out. I can't tell you guys how many times I see a team running away, nobody CC'd, and we're sitting in yellow healing for like small twos, and they're just getting tagged over and over and over from what's his name, a Rainer going 8% faster, right? And so giving 10% to your entire team can prevent almost all damage that your team's taking. If you're running away from auto attackers or you're running away from people that are already at the edge of their range. So if you're trying to get away from a fight and you want to save your team, it's almost always better to be in green to give that extra movement speed, where if you're in the middle of a fight or your team CC'd, you want to be in yellow. Hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. I guess I could have made like a chart or something of when you should be in which, but it ultimately comes up to what you feel is necessary. But if you're first starting to play Lucio, I definitely think those are great rules of thumb to start. Level 7 is kind of a minor mistake, but it is one that I would say is probably my most infuriating mistake that I see when it does happen. And I've seen this several times. But let's say you take any talents. The build that's highlighted is kind of you're first learning Lucio and you want to kind of have it a little bit easier. So I generally recommend like Party Mix and to Subwoofer. And then I usually recommend Reverse Amp. Reverse Amp's kind of interesting. Level 20, you do 100 DPS over the course of Amp It Up. That's 300 damage every time you press E. It's about 10% of Lucio's health, right? To be able to do 10% of everyone's health on the enemy team is pretty huge. I mean, we've seen the value of Titan Grenade being thrown out and finishing someone off at about 10-15% health if they're a lower max health target. And so it's kind of similar. Reverse Amp can be a lot of damage throughout fights, especially if you combine it with something like Up the Frequency, where you can lower the cooldown of your Amp It Up, and so you could be constantly doing that damage over and over and over. Not to mention on the reverse side of this, an enemy team that's running away, if you give your team 30% movement speed, lower their speed by 20%, you're basically just running circles around the enemy team. And so Reverse Amp is an amazing talent, and I would recommend taking it about 80% of the time. But there is one particular time that it can really backfire. Amp It Up does damage, and it does barely any damage, but it procs really fast. So if I was to grab Amp It Up and I was to press E, you can see, oh, I'm on this. You can see that the, let me toggle cooldowns for a second. You can see that the damage numbers that are popping up very quickly. So if you happen to be going against someone who has an action every time that they take damage, let's say Genji's the most common. Every time that he takes damage from Deflect, while he's using Deflect, he will fire another attack back. Because you attack so fast and you're doing less damage than his Deflect's doing, you're basically damaging your team more than you're damaging the enemy team. There's also the case that's kind of the opposite. If you're going against a Mal'Ganis, every time that he takes damage, he will then heal for a portion of that. Well, and it's a flat number. So amp it up with reverse amp, you could actually be healing the enemy Mal'Ganis if he recognizes when reverse amp is being activated. There's another case too with D.Va, I believe level 16. She has a talent that if she lowers someone's damage, every time that she lowers their damage, she then heals. Again, another area where you're doing damage to a lot of enemies. Well, now she's healing her full health bar whenever you use reverse amp. She recognizes it, she reduces your damage, and she heals herself back up to full. And so there are several instances of this, but what I'm going to say is if you have sleeps on your team, and that's another thing too, where I see the biggest problems is things like Mal'Ganis. Mal'Ganis will go and sleep a bunch of people, and then reverse amp will wake them all up during the same fight because you usually use those abilities. Both heroes try to use these at the same time. And so if you have a sleep on your team, if you have a Genji, a Mal'Ganis, a D.Va, anything that gains value off of each time you hit them on the opposing team. And D.Va also has another one that every time, I think D.Va and Mei have forms of, or not, I know D.Va has one. I know there's another one. Every time that she takes damage, she gains armor. There's another one that's like that too, but pay attention to the enemy's talents. Pay attention to what heroes you're playing against. Do your best to kind of understand the few you need to be concerned about. I would say on the opposing team, we're looking at Mal'Ganis, Genji. We're looking at D.Va. On your team, any sleeps, which is in the tank role, I think there's only really Mal'Ganis. And then there's a couple healers. You generally probably won't have a healer with a sleep at the same time as a Lucio, but reverse amp, I've seen. I actually remember recently I watched a game. I was coaching this team, and they had a Mal'Ganis and they had a Lucio, and Mal'Ganis's E was basically useless. He would go and like take half his health trying to sleep the enemy team, and they would all wake up instantly from reverse amp. And the other talents are not bad. Good vibrations. I've seen. I watched a game where some guy was on Tomb of the Spider Queen, and he was preventing 4 people from turning in by going around in circles using off the wall to have the reduced cooldown on Soundwave, and then also using good vibrations to get large shields. And so he was repeatedly getting these like huge shields. He was repeatedly healing himself back up, wall riding the whole time, and he had a really low cooldown on off the wall, and he was just knocking people around, interrupting, and he interrupted 4 people to the point that they just gave up. They couldn't kill him, and they couldn't turn in. And so this Lucio basically just ruined the game for them. There are opportunities like that where you can adjust your talents and you don't need to go reverse amp. Even though I think this talent is a great talent. Good vibrations is really good. Boombox is also really good too. If you're in a situation where you're splitting from your team often, say you have like a dive comp, but then you have a couple members that aren't going to be diving with the rest of your members, then you can drop down a boombox for the members that are staying behind, and you can go dive with the rest of your team, giving healing and movement speed to the team that you're jumping in with. Boombox can also be used for vision. You can drop boombox in a bush, and then you can see if someone tries to go through it. And boombox also now gives 5 armor whenever people are in the boombox radius, which is kind of nice too. So the other talents at 7 are really good. So whenever you recognize a situation that 1, either the other talents will be better, or 2, whether it's just a pure mistake to pick reverse amp, in both of those situations, I think that it should be something that you want to look at. Now, in this new series of 4 mistakes, I like to give a build to everyone. What I'm going to recommend is the build I recommended for low rank Lucio play. It's very easy to play. It tends to be rather rewarding with less skill required than the wall ride builds. And so I'm going to kind of explain the playstyle difference than what the wall ride builds you would see in the competitive level. I think if you decide that you want to use Lucio to rank up and you want to kind of move into that higher level play, you eventually do need to learn the wall ride builds and the play styles. But for those that are watching this video who probably don't have a lot of experience with Lucio and want to go through and learn this play style, I will talk about it a little bit. So we take Party Mix. Party Mix is going to do 2 things. The main thing is it's going to increase the range of your AoE. Specifically in solo queue, the AoE of your heal is something that people will never pay attention to, and they may never be in the range they need to be in. So party mix allows you to have a larger range, and this larger range is large enough you can almost always catch everyone on your team every fight, as long as you don't have someone that's diving heavily into their team. Level 4, I generally recommend Subwoofer. Both of these other two talents are amazing, and I used to recommend Off the Wall. The reason I recommend Subwoofer now is because you can peel really well against things that are common in solo queue, or at least in Storm League. While I was moving up in ranks, all through Gold and Plat, I was seeing Kira's, I was seeing Illidan's, I was seeing Artanis's, and in all of those situations, if I used a Subwoofer knockback, the distance that I sent someone was far enough to where they could never get back to my team without using enough abilities to get there that we could easily take them out. And it was also really good with a lot of tanks too. If for some reason we got the quest completed, it was enough to easily interrupt things like Mosh, to get rid of a Garrosh before he gets close enough to even throw you. And so Subwoofer ends up being a really great talent to answer any form of engage that the enemies are doing, while also answering any form of divers that they might have. If they have no engage and no divers, then the damage that the enemies do in solo queue, or at least in Storm League, is so spread out that it doesn't really matter, and that's exactly the type of healing you want. Then we go into Reverse Amp. Reverse Amp is what I pick most of the time, with the exceptions that I've mentioned before. Level 10, I take both Sound Barrier and High Five. I think it depends on what the enemies have and what we need to do. If they're focusing on a single target, High Five's great to give that target unstoppable and allow that target to get a little bit of healing and walk away from whatever was about to be thrown at them. You can also High Five into a knockback to almost guarantee that that target will live. I like Sound Barrier if the enemies are going to be kind of womboing a little bit. If I see like Apocalypse, I'm going to go High Five, but then if I see Lightning Breath, I might go Sound Barrier. So that if he tries to Lightning Breath, I can Sound Barrier, and we survive through the entire Lightning Breath, and we generally are also going to win the fight because they don't want to leave their Diablo to die, so they commit to the fight. And so just think about how the enemy team needs to win the fight and adjust accordingly. Level 13, I generally take all together. This allows you to stay in the healing form and also adjust around the team fight. I often like heavy casters if I need to interrupt something that I won't get caught by, like a Mosh, because you'll get caught with a Mosh. But let's say you're going against a Diva and you want to turn off her damage reduction. You could use this to quickly turn that off. Another good example is like if you're against like an Azmodan, if he's in range to laser you, then you're in range to stun him and turn off his laser. But other than that, I generally like all together. It allows it to where you don't need to be near walls all the time. It's good in almost every situation, and allows you to stay in the healing form while repositioning throughout a team fight to make sure that you're getting maximum healing. Level 16, I go Rejuvenation if or Rejuvenation, I don't know, whatever. If we have either two bruisers and a tank, or two tanks and a bruiser, or just like an overall beefy team. Otherwise, I've been taking up the frequency a lot more because it gets more procs out of Reverse Amp. And the one downside about this talent before was that you would have to activate it to reduce the cooldown, or you wouldn't get the extra range by wall riding, or you just simply run out of mana. But what they did with Party Mix was they made it to where for every 1 minute played, you're also going to be increasing your maximum mana by 10. I have games where this talent is giving me almost infinite ability to cast up the frequency. And then when you combine that again with Reverse Amp, you'll find yourself just constantly doing damage, constantly moving your team around, constantly slowing the enemy team, constantly healing, and it's just really, really valuable. So it all depends on what your team looks like, but I do like up the frequency more often now. But the meta still generally picks for this. Also, it depends on how the enemies are doing damage. If the damage is coming off fast at the front of a fight, let's say they've got like a lot of burst damage, this is more burst healing, but this is more sustained healing. Low ranks, nobody's bursting correctly, so this is almost always going to be better. High ranks, sometimes even if your team's not tanky, you have to take this talent just so that you can keep up with the burst.
Choose a talent.
And level 20. Level 20, I would say if you take high 5, you almost always want to take Mixing Fire. The ability to quickly reduce healing by 50% on the targets your team's trying to kill is incredibly beneficial. Lowering the cost and cooldown allows you to cleanse your team more often, and there's times during fights where you could basically Mixing Fire all the way around your team, the enemy team, and then come back to your team, heal, and then go back to Mixing Fire all the way in a circle again. You'll need the extra mana from Party Mix to make that happen, especially since they made the mana cost for I5 a tad bit higher. But it can be a really game-changing upgrade. Bossa Nova is good if you have predictable common damage you need to deal with. Say they've got Judgment that always goes in. You can always Bossa Nova whenever the Judgment goes in. Or say they just have a very common cooldown you need to always go for. Then Bossa Nova is great for that. House Party is what I often recommend if you're going against a lot of poke. What it does is it makes your crossfade. For each ally affected by your crossfade, you increase your overall healing. That's your healing of everything. That could be your high 5 healing. That could be the healing of Amp It Up. That could be healing of just the basic crossfade. It's all of your healing. Because we're getting the increased range, this will almost always have that 40% increased healing, which is game-changing if the enemies are not focusing individual targets. And if they are focusing, getting that extra 40% on high 5 is pretty huge. So again, outside of competitive, outside of coordinated play, outside of the highest levels, House Party is surprisingly good. Summer Anthem I only take against Malthael, or if I have a Zul'jin on my team. The reason that I go with those is because the Zul'jin, this will give him a couple extra seconds after his ult to survive just a little bit longer. Now, if Zul'jin's getting the upgrade on his ult, which he should, then this won't matter too much other than potentially saving him while he's CC'd to give him a couple extra seconds so that he can pop his ult and kind of give him a little bit more before he gets his ult out. But I generally only pick this with Malthael. Malthael uses his ult, you use Summer Anthem, he doesn't get the kill, he doesn't get the reset, and you can heal that target back up again. Outside of Malthael, I almost always will take one of these three. Bossa Nova for predictable burst damage that you can always cast before they do the burst. Mixing Fire for any time that the enemies are running like double heals or just targets that your team just really needs to pick out. Or House Party if you're expecting the fights to go long and you need to have that overwhelming amount of healing throughout those fights. That is the build that I recommend for Lucio for all of you guys that are first getting to know Lucio. Once you really get the understanding of Lucio, I'd recommend getting into some of my higher level guides on Lucio to train you a little bit more on how he's played at the highest level. That's generally more in an aggressive play style where you're taking Accelerando to get faster than mount speed. You'll quickly go up, you'll jump past someone, knock them into your team, get back into your team, and then lead to a kill. Oftentimes people will even combine that with high 5 to get back to their team faster. They'll go in, they'll get behind someone, knock them, and then they'll go through and they'll high 5 back to their team, and it's quick kill one after another in the competitive levels. And so if you really want to be playing, taking your Lucio to the next level, I would recommend start practicing that play style and eventually shift into that. But if you're just picking up Lucio and you want to just use him for his high healing output after level 16-ish, then this build is definitely going to be a strong build, especially when you're looking at climbing the ranks. And I think this build works all the way up until probably around the Diamond Master level when you finally need to start really adding more value and impact into your games. Thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out any of my other videos, including my other 4 mistakes videos that I've had, especially the new 2021 editions.